Welcome to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. We interview great guests who inspire you to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Be sure you visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, just relax as you listen. You can do something else, but be ready to make an important note. And let's get started.
The title of this podcast is Surviving the Pandemic and Getting the Love You Want. Things we'll be talking about are the Love Factor Inventory, aka LFI. The LFI assessment is a powerful way to quickly move from a surface discussion to the core, deeper issues that reveal your strength and weaknesses in your ability to develop and sustain intimate, loving relationships. Stop sabotaging yourself. Become more effective in creating the relationships you want. Now that is a valuable subject. Our guest, Dr. Ronald Mann, has been helping people awaken their consciousness for over 40 years. That's 40. As a psychologist, master coach, and healer. His presence and depth of intuitive insight, along with his psychological training, give him a unique expertise in the field of spiritual development. Dr. Mann obtained a master's degree in educational psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 1971, and a doctor of philosophy from the California School of Professional Psychology, Los Angeles, in 1974. He's been at it for some time. He obtained postgraduate training in executive coaching and organization development from the William James Institute of the Professional School of Psychology. He practiced as a licensed psychologist from 1976 to 2002. He has appeared on Fox Sports Net, Fox Boston 25 Morning News, The Gary Collins Show, Good Morning America, and numerous radio interview shows. Author Dr. Mann has written 6 books, that's 6. Sacred Healing, Integrating Spirituality with Psychotherapy, and that's an LA Times bestseller. The Yoga of Golf, Bouncing Back, How to Recover When Life Knocks You Down, from Morgan James Publishing, and The Making of a Champion, Success is an Inconvenience, the hard truth about what it takes to be successful. That's the same title? I want to be sure on that. Okay, right.
That's part of it.
All right, and not just on game day, but okay, I want to get this correct. The Making of a Champion, Success is an Inconvenience, the hard truth about what it takes to be successful, not just on game day, but every day. There we go. Very good. You got a bunch of books here, man. So, excuse me if I'm a little thrown off a bit here. You're quite prolific. Written for and with head football coach Joseph Taylor. Well, that's interesting. Published by Waterfront Press. Also, Learning to Win, Guide to Coaching Junior and Collegiate Golfers. And Bouncing Back 2017 in Crisis, How to Prepare for and Recover from Life's Greatest Threats. Now that's very relevant today, isn't it, in the age of COVID? And that's from Mann Consulting Group. He has also developed and produced a variety of audio programs for meditation, self-healing, and stress reduction. These can be found at ronmann.com. That's RONMANN.com and Amazon.com. Wow, that is quite a resume and biography. Now he's Dr. Ronald Mann, but he's given me permission to call him Ron. All right, so don't you try it at home. I've got permission. All right, but how do you feel about all that stuff you've done, by the way?
Well, it doesn't seem like a big deal to me because I did it when I felt inspired to do it. I never thought I'd write 6 books. After I wrote the first one and it was on the LA Times bestseller list, I said, well, this is it. This is everything I have to say. I'm never going to write another book again. And then something would show up, like the one with Coach Joe Taylor. He called me, asked me to write a book for him. He's a famous guy in his world. He's in 4 Hall of Fames in the football world. So I was pretty honored to work with him. He's a great guy. So these books just kind of came out when it was time. And, I look back on all the things I've done. I've created a ton of stuff. But at the time, it was just, everybody needs something to do. And I felt pretty inspired to do it. And so I would do it. And then I'd move on and do whatever. And we didn't even talk about the fact I worked in the Soviet Union for 3 years in the peace movement. When Reagan wanted to nuke the Russians in 1980 something, in meditation, I had this kind of spiritual vision and basically said, you want to help? I go, well, if you want me to help, I'm available. So within 3 months, I had a nonprofit organization. And an organization and money, and teamed up with somebody. We were on a plane going to Moscow to set up these citizen diplomacy exchanges. So for a few years, I went back and forth, bringing people together. It was a basic model that if you like somebody,
what was the genesis of that? Where did the initiative come from?
Like I said, came from meditation. I was living in Northern California at the time. I had dropped out of Beverly Hills. I had a private practice and had a spiritual awakening when I was working with terminally ill kids. So now I'm this psychologist with a spiritual realization, and I was longing to be around a spiritual community. So I got into one, turned out to be a cult. So I left after a couple of years, but that put me up into Northern California. So I'm living up in Northern California.
I'm fascinated by cults, by the way. I study cults. I love them.
Well, we could talk about cults if you want, because I lived in one for 2 years.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down. That's gonna work itself in.
And actually, if people are interested in the leadership problems of that, in my book, Sacred Healing, there's a chapter called Spiritual Advancement and Pathological Narcissism. And I don't mention his name, but it was a case study on the guy, the Swami, who is leading that up. And it shows how you can be spiritually evolved and have some degree of realization, but if you don't work on yourself at a psychological level, forget it. So, he's got this tremendous connection to his soul, but at a personality level, it's like a 16-year-old kid. So it's a lot of power for a 16-year-old kid to have.
Right.
So it's a good discussion.
That's good. Right. I mean, you can talk about balance in life in various categories, or you can talk about the basic balance, with just 2 basic elements of a person, which is, a spiritual side and a psychological side. And you don't even have to break it down from that. And both of them better have some degree of maturity.
That's right. All right. So back to the Soviet Union thing. I'm living up in Northern California, blissed out, having a nice life, not much stress, feeling God's presence everywhere. And I'm meditating like I did every day. And I get this vision of Marysville, which is 20 miles away from where I was. I was in Nevada City in those days. And the vision is the bomb drops in Marysville. I got 3 seconds before I'm vaporized. I remember that from elementary school, where you had to dive under the table, to protect yourself, like that was going to do anything.
I'm 56. How old are you?
74.
Okay. God bless you, man. You're doing great, sir.
Yeah, I'm still alive.
that's half the battle.
Yeah. And so I get this vision. And
by the way, if you're listening, most of the audience is listening, you got to check us out on YouTube. The guy looks great. He's a handsome guy. You would never think he's in his 70s. I continue.
Thank you. Meditation. I attribute my health and my youthful appearance to meditation, because when you go into meditation, if you go really deep, you're out of time. Right? You're not in time. So you figure I've been meditating for 40 years. Sorry about that. Thought I turned off my phone.
No, we're fine. I didn't even know what you were talking about. You're good to go.
Oh, my phone's ringing. Okay. So all that time in meditation, you're kind of out of time. So I gained a lot of youth because I'm spending all that time in meditation, not aging when I'm in deep meditation. So I think that's
wow. You know what? I buy it. I'm pretty gullible, but I say that, tongue in cheek. But I think there's truth there. I think there's validity.
Yeah. Because my older brother is only 2 years older than me. And this is many years ago, we were someplace and they looked at him and said, "Oh, are you his father?" I mean, he was mortified. Right. And so, and, drinks, and just not, now he's healthier, but back then his lifestyle wasn't so great. So in this vision, I see Marysville kind of evaporating, and I know I'm going soon. And there's this inner voice, and the voice says, "Have you done everything in your power to keep this from happening?" And my thought was, no, I haven't been doing anything. I was sitting here, list out, minding my own business. So I thought,
were you also dropping some acid too, Ron?
No. I mean, I stopped doing, the worst I ever got really was marijuana.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I used to get stoned when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, that's
the product of the 60s. And
nothing
I stopped
to, much worse things or more strong.
Right. I stopped getting stoned only because of my spiritual practice. I got to a point where if I got stoned, I came down. My natural state was beyond where the grass was taking me. So I was bummed out getting stoned because I felt less clear, less joyful, kind of fuzzed up. I go, forget it. I'm not doing this.
I got a bunch of things to say about in response to what you're saying, because I already say we're gonna already got a great rapport and so much to talk about. I hope that we can keep this within an hour. I don't know. I already got a feeling it's gonna go over because of the way you are and everything. But I'm a certified coach. I'm an NLP practitioner. I'm into all these philosophies, psychologies, self-helps, and personal development. The most profound and important thing I've ever done was to get clean and sober. I've been sober 21 years now. Nothing like having clarity of mind. There's nothing like it to think things through without needing a crutch, having a crutch, wanting a crutch, and thinking things through and being able to discern things without having confusion come from, drugs and intoxication or just even wanting that. It is a whole other life, and it is critically, I mean, listen, everyone is free to do what they want to do, make their own choices. But I am a great proponent of sobriety.
Well, one of the things, in addition, and I agree with everything you said, is that if you learn to quiet down and your inner life isn't toxic, so you work out your emotional stuff and you're not kind of self-medicating and dumbing yourself out with the drugs, your intuition gets better because it comes from your heart, comes from your inner life. And if you're quiet in there, there's a great story. The student goes to his master and says, "Master, how is it you always know what I'm thinking?" He said, "Oh, it's very simple. We sit together and I hear someone thinking and I know it's not me."
That's great, man. Oh, wow. By the way, while you were over in Russia in the 80s, ironically, I was in Reagan's army, paratrooper, and and we used to train. We were taught who the enemy was. It was the Soviet soldier or the Axis, the Eastern European alliance, and we will learn how to, who the enemy was and how to fight him. And quite frankly, we were brainwashed. I don't say that in any sort of indictment towards the military. That's what the military has to do to have good soldiers, to really brainwash them. And it really was culture shock for me when I left the army in '87. Getting back to the civilian world and not having a chain of command and hostility not being the answer for life. But I'm so glad that we worked, the countries worked things through, and now we have civility, hopefully even more. So, but tell me more about this what you did over in Russia in the 80s.
Well, the plan was kind of simple. If you bring normal people together, this is non-governmental on the whole. We took Americans into the Soviet Union, and we had connections in there with local Soviet citizens who had their own network of citizens. So I could take you into Moscow. Within 2 hours, you'd be in somebody's home talking to a Soviet citizen who had similar interests that you did. And so our philosophy, and I worked with this woman, Ramajoti Vernon, we teamed up. And the idea was, well, if you like someone, you're probably not going to nuke them. Right? It was a simple thing. So we brought Soviets into the United States, got them on TV and radio, and just tried to humanize the whole thing. And I think one of the great spin-offs of one of the trips, it was a small group, Mark Gerzon, who's a filmmaker and a writer. He met the Soviet filmmaker people, because, we pair people up with similar interests. He invited them to Hollywood for what he called the Entertainment Summit. In those days, if you went to the movies, every movie needs conflict, right? You need a villain, you need a hero. So it was always American versus Soviets. And they made a decision, getting chills as I say that, they made a decision to stop portraying each other as the enemy, because they knew it was bad for the culture and the violence that it kind of incited people. So in that era, things change. It went from Soviets to the Middle East, and now we're into aliens, right? So everybody's fighting the aliens. Gotten off planet Earth.
The aliens are going to have a hard time when they land. They're going to have a hard time.
Right. If they look at all human, no one will believe they're an alien, because everybody thinks they look like insects.
Yeah, right. They're like, oh, that's how you guys thought of us? Let's take a quick moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Dr. Ronald Mann.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. People start something, then something comes up, or they need a break or even a vacation, and they often never get back on track. Perficio is designed to allow all of this. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can live your life as you learn and make progress toward your life-changing goals.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're with Dr. Ronald Mann. I just talked we were talking about when he went over to Russia in the 80s. And I also mentioned paradoxically that I was in the American Army at the same time. And there was, unlike now, people, I don't know, younger people don't realize it, but this was the height of the Cold War. There was a lot of tension in the world. There were a lot of stakes. Global Armageddon was the stakes. So it was very tense. It was, it wasn't nearly, there's always issues, right? Or conflict. But that was a big one. I think that was more, it was, you could taste it. It was a tension. It was a constant tension.
Right. There was a lot. And one of the spin-off things I was able to do, I went to the San Francisco FBI office and showed them videos or slides in those days of our trip, because they can't get into the Soviet, or couldn't then, because they're FBI, right?
Did they try to recruit you, Ron? Did they try to recruit you?
No, they didn't. But I felt like it was the most patriotic group of people I'd ever been around. They were really wholesome, down to earth, great human beings. We had a good time. I was there for a couple hours, and they gave us a standing ovation when we were done.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
Tell me more about it. I interrupted you.
Well, it was just, I showed them slides and told stories, about the people. And again, the idea was
there was a communication, there was a familiarity that it was occurring.
Yeah, and it said these are the normal human being citizens that we're meeting, engaged. We're just trying to get people to people.
Not monsters.
I don't know. And although I was invited to go to a meeting with the military. I was in a meeting with high and generals of the Soviet Army, and heard them whining and complaining about, it doesn't matter what we do, the Americans won't believe it. And I was young in those days. I was like 27, I think, 28, 29, I don't know, I was pretty young. And I felt, again, from an intuitive kind of inspired place, I stood up, I said, listen, if that's what you think, then do something so bold that they can't discount it. Don't let that keep you from taking some action. So I was talking, these generals and stuff. So it was an interesting time in my life.
Great stuff. I mentioned I was in the Army in that same era. Yeah, I joined the Army because I was patriotic, but there was also another reason which I wasn't so vocal about. And actually is that not that not just that I wanted to kill for my country. I literally wanted to kill, but what was beneath that? I wanted to be killed. I had some issues to work through. I wanted to be killed, and then I came from a broken home, as they call it, and that was really the genesis of this angst and rage I had with the world was my father's departure. I don't blame him. I worked through that. I worked that issue. And I'll bring this up because I had a serious problem with the world because I had a serious problem with myself. And I worked through those issues, and this was the root of my addiction, which I had for a long time until I finally sobered up, after 8 years of trying, in about 600 attempts, right? So, and then I started working through these issues of these, this self-loathing, which I wasn't even aware of. I thought I loved myself. It was just a denial. And as a matter of fact, when I finally did an esteemable thing in early recovery, I looked in the mirror and I had a very odd sensation, and I went like this. What is this? What is this? And then I realized it was me liking myself for the first time ever. I was like, oh my God, it blew me away. So I worked through those issues, and now I love the world, and it's because I love myself. And I've worked through these issues, and that's a critical thing. We're gonna start talking about love, but in my experience, you gotta love yourself before you can love another.
Well, you're also saying a very profound thing here, and it's that if you want to change your life, change yourself. A lot of people go, oh, I don't like my job, I don't like this, I don't like that, and the reality is we take ourselves wherever we go. So it doesn't matter. You can change partners, change cities, change jobs, but you're going to recreate whatever it is that's inside of you. And so that's a profound message for your listeners. If you want to change your life, don't look around, look at your outer circumstances, look inside. Absolutely. And see what you need to transform.
How do you help people find love? That's a big one.
It's good. It is a big one. As a psychologist, I developed a test 35 years ago called the Love Factor Inventory. And I was curious about how can we take a look at love? Because by this time I was a spiritual guy, I was a psychological guy. The spiritual part of me opened up my heart and got me more involved in loving relationships than psychology ever did, although it helped me clean up some personality things. And so I did this national study. I gave this test. I designed it and gave it to 2,000 people across the United States. I did all the research that it takes to create a test. So it's got 10 or 11 scales, measures things like what we were talking about, self-respect. I mean, if you don't love yourself and respect yourself, you're going to have problems. Compassion, friendship, psychological adjustment, how comfortable, it's called the primitive self. It's like Jung's shadow. It's like what's going on inside. It's like when Luke went into the cave to confront the Darth Vader part of himself.
That's Return of the Jedi, I think that one is.
Right, yeah. Right. And so this test basically gives you very accurate and very quick information about your capacity to function in these areas. And so it's like a mirror. If you introspect, you go inside, you can find stuff. But if you're into a lot of denial and repression, it's hard to see anything. Like you said, I thought I was loved myself, and then things happen and things got revealed. This is a quick and less painful way than life to discover what's in there. And in the hands of a coach or a therapist who knows what they're doing, you can have a profound discussion about your results. There's, like I said, there's 124 items to respond to. Some people, oh, it's so long. It takes 15 minutes. If you can't invest 15 minutes in yourself, then what are you doing? It takes 15 minutes. You can't get profound information if you ask someone 5 questions, typically. Right. So it's got more items, and each scale's got about 10 items. Typically, I can have an hour discussion with somebody about one scale because we go into these items. For instance, someone, and this is a real story. So, I think I'm pretty trusting. So I said, well, let's take a look, because the trust scale was a little low. So the first item said, do you trust men? No. Right. Do you trust women? No. I go, well, you say you're pretty trusting, but you don't seem to trust humanity. So what's going on? So now we're having a real conversation about how she really feels about men and women and stuff. And like you mentioned, although people may not have really got it, is that we internalize what happened in our relationships with our parents. So if we don't like one of our parents because the relationship was bad and we have not resolved all that stuff, it's through osmosis. That comes in, becomes part of our subconscious. And so we have to resolve these issues. When people say, you need to forgive them, they go, I'm not going to forgive them, they didn't deserve to be forgiven. You're doing it for yourself. If you forgive somebody, it elevates your heart. It frees you from the negativity that you're holding and constantly going around in your mind. I used to do a lot of sports psychology. I worked with golfers, and this one guy I was working with, he was trying to get past the PGA test, and he kept screwing it up. And we're talking, and it turns out that one of the other members at the club, he hated this guy, and he would often, see him, and he said, whenever I'm putting or just quiet, he's there, right? And I said, well, until you resolve that, you're never going to pass this test, because it's going to, and he never did. He said, I'll never forgive that guy, right? And he didn't get it, that he was doing it for himself, not that. So the test gives you quick information and opens up the opportunity to have a structured, profound discussion. You can also do it with a couple. So you and I in a relationship. I take it, I rate me. You take it, you rate you. It's like a 360. Then I take it again and I rate how I perceive you. And then you rate how you perceive me. So we've got my delusion about who I think I am. And then we've got your perception of what's your experience with me, right? And the discussions that come out of that, just the listening. I mean, if partners oftentimes don't listen to each other very well, tend to interrupt, and they say what they think. So if one partner just listens to the coaching of the other person, they're going to learn a lot about that person that they may not have heard before. And then once you figure out,
is that the love factor inventory, about
yes,
ideas about yourself and then perceptions about the other?
Can be. So you can buy it as an individual and get one use, normal price $99.95. So you take it and you get your own. For a couple $100, you get 4 uses. So it's actually kind of reduced price. So you can take it 4 times.
I want to talk at length about the love factor inventory and about how you measure love. But first, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Then I want to talk at length about that, because that deserves a big block of time. So let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. What is the key to wealth? It's not just making money. It's not wasting it. Avoiding debt and costly mistakes. To get the wealth mindset, visit www.proficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can start acting like a millionaire instead of just dreaming to be one.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're with Dr. Ronald Mann. We're talking about the love factor inventory, and I just interrupted him, and now I'm going to let him resume without interruption from me. He's talking about the LFI and how it works and how you can get it.
So basically, I was explaining that it's a profound way to get some quick information about your capacity to function. And the scales that I developed are down-to-earth, real things that we see in people's ability to relate. There's also a spirituality scale, which makes it, I think, rather unique. And people say, oh, how do you measure spirituality? Well, there's a difference between belief and experience. In religion, you can believe whatever you want, right? And a lot of people turn religion into truth, especially in politics. So or you turn beliefs into truth. So whatever you believe, then that's the reality. Well, I hate to tell you, that's not necessarily the case. So I ask some questions about what do you believe, but I also, there are items in there that what is your experience? Because if you have a real experience of this overwhelming divine Christ consciousness love, it will change you. You love everybody. I mean, everybody is kind of part of your family, and there's the desire to serve and to help people. If you haven't had that experience, you might say, oh, I think it's good to serve. I think it's good to help people. But how much do you really embody that, and how much do you do that? So the spirituality scale also gets played out in some of the other scales because of my background in meditation, yoga, hang out in a lot of spiritual communities, and it's not uncommon to find people say, oh, I'm so spiritual, right? And you hang out with them and they're not very kind, they're judgmental, they're controlling, they're competitive. And so there's a great thought that your true spirituality is tested in the light of day. So you say, oh, I'm a spiritual guy, but your compassion score is low. Well, if you're so spiritual, how come you don't feel compassion for other people? Or your friendship score is low, or your trust score is low. So you begin to see how all these various scales interrelate, and the discussion is helping people to integrate at a higher level so they can take their beliefs and materialize those as real actions and behaviors so they can engage other people and be the kind of person that somebody would want to be with. In the dating world, I'm looking for Mr. Right, Mr. Perfect, And then my question is, well, if the perfect person showed up, why would they want to be involved with you? Look at what you're telling me.
Exactly.
I mean, if you really want to be ready to have the love you want, then transform yourself, and you will magnetize that to you.
In the 90s, I've been a born again Christian more times than I'm sure of. And I'm still a Christian, even though I'm sure 99% of Christians would say, you're not a Christian. You believe in too many other things to be a Christian. Well, I'm like, well, that's the kind of Christian I am. I'm an open-minded kind, I believe. I don't know, my deity doesn't have any of the crap traits that you or I have, like judgmentalism, for example, or anger or jealousy. No, that's our traits. My God is devoid of those things like that. Anyway, but I got into forgiveness, which is a very important thing to me. Forgiveness is the essence of spirituality, but it was really much more intellectual then, and not until I got into a romance where I came to hate the woman because I was so injured by her, that I really learned about the difficulty of forgiveness, when I had to actually forgive when I felt like killing, and it took me, I had to forgive her about 10,000 times. I'm exaggerating, but every day the forgiveness was gone. Right. And I had to re-forgive. And then until one day the forgiveness stuck.
Well, I agree with that. Forgiveness is huge. That gratitude, that kind of go hand in hand. That forgiveness for me is kind of a state of grace. It's very hard from our ego perspective because
Yes.
we've been wounded. I mean, we're justified because they really hurt us. I mean, nobody likes to be hurt. So it's hard to forgive them. But if you pray for forgiveness and some divine presence shows up, and through that consciousness cleans out your heart and elevates you, you find yourself in a state of forgiveness because you're kind of pulled out and healed from all those wounds that have happened. You don't forget, you know what happened, and hopefully your judgment's better in choosing people. But to combine the spiritual with the human part, I think is the best way. When I was practicing as a psychologist and then woke up spiritually, my saying when I was talking to other psychologists is that if you're just using psychology and you're not realizing the power of the soul and how that relates to healing, and you're not bringing that into your practice, and it's like playing cards with a half a deck. I mean, you're missing out on a lot of stuff that's part of our nature.
You know, really, in my experience, forgiveness is really a revolutionary thing. If it's been hard, or at least if you've had the less you've had it, it's a revolutionary thing when you do have it. And
Yeah.
really, you see things differently, you feel differently. You know, you're actually lighter. You feel lighter, and it's really, you know, what was the expression? Taking a yoke off yourself. You can't overemphasize the value of forgiveness and how it changes when you go from unforgiving to forgiving. It's a night and day situation.
It is, because our consciousness is in a higher state. It's a higher vibration when we're in that state of forgiveness. And so it is like a yoke, because we experience a lightness, and we might even see a lot of inner light along with that too. But it elevates us to a different realm of existence in a way. Our vibratory rate changes, and all of a sudden we find new people showing up in our life because we're now resonating at a higher frequency. So we draw those kind of people to us.
And it's not just a vital thing to have generally, but especially in a sexual romantic relationship, right? When, you know.
Oh, it changes it so dramatically. Most people are clueless about the potential for the spiritual, heart loving connection that you can have through the body. You know, if you're just going for sex as a physical thing, you can have good physical sex. But if you want to elevate your intimacy through the body, if you're conscious, connected to your heart, have some degree of awareness of energy, and you make a connection through your heart with another person, you can be in this ecstatic state of love. It's like beyond meditation. While you're having this physical experience, you're also bringing your soul into it. So there's no separation now between your spirit and your body.
You know, I recently got into a romantic relationship, and I learned a lot, you know, from my life. And I said to the woman is, you know, she's a mother. And I told her afterwards, listen, I really like you. I would love to be in a relationship with you, but I don't see myself in a long-term relationship with a mother. I'm like, but we could have a relationship, but if we can call it an exclusive companionship, well, I'm not promising something in the future, but we can be there for each other with these parameters. And I call it the HRC. And I've learned this I've developed this just from, you know, having previous experience. And I remember it by remembering Hillary Rodham Clinton. I'm not saying anything about her politically, but that's where I remembered HRC. HRC, honesty, respect, and caring. That's the parameters that I want to give you and that I want from you, right? If I can always be honest with you, as honest as I can be, that means no deception, okay? That means no secrets that you know, that I want to keep from you. You know, that doesn't mean I got to tell you everything, right? But no deception. Respect. Am I always acting with respect for you? You know, even though you're not there. And caring. Am I acting in a caring way? That's what I want to give to you, and that's what I want from you. She accepted that, and so we had that. But as time continued, her needs grew for me. She's like, I want to be your girlfriend. I just don't want to be your exclusive companion. I said, well, okay, I can give you that title and I can be your boyfriend. But, you know, and I do feel a growing attachment and tenderness, you know, and, you know, but I still have that same basic position, but it's working for me, this and her too, even though she's more affectionate than I am, which is not an uncommon thing for women and men. You know, she's generally more affectionate, and she's younger than me. Her libido is much higher than mine. I'm like, well, you know, that sexual needs got to be met. You know, that's an important thing. So do you have any commentary on this description that I'm giving you, Doc?
The HRC?
All of it, HRC, exclusive companionship.
Well, yeah, different people can have different kind of relationships. So there's no model, so you have to be this or that.
Right.
But what you identified with HRC are key components I mean, respect says, oh, I love you, but I don't respect you. Well, you can't really love somebody if you don't respect them.
Right.
And even in the business world, people go, well, I want people to like me. I said, well, what's more important? You want to be liked or you want to be respected? Right? Respect in a relationship is critical, because if you respect somebody, all of a sudden you value them. I mean, there's a love and an acknowledgement and appreciate. People feel it. I mean, you look at somebody with respect, they feel acknowledged and they're empowered by that.
Mm.
And so that's a great gift to give somebody. If you don't respect somebody, they feel it and they feel diminished by that. So as one of the critical elements is, if you want to have a successful relationship and you want to elevate your life, then work on your capacity to be more respectful of other people. And so a component of that would be to learn how to be non-judgmental, because if you're always judging people, you can't respect them because you're so busy judging them. Oh, this, I don't, blah, blah. You need to just clear your mind and get that out of there. And if you could be non-judgmental, it frees you up to actually comprehend who they really are, to deepen your perception. You don't have to agree with anybody to really understand them. And they could be different, but if you see that they are really their authentic self, honoring who they are, and you have a direct perception of that, typically you're going to respect that because you're going to accept them for who they are. So the more aligned we can get with ourselves and find people who are honest and have a degree of authenticity, then I think the more profound the relationship can be. Caring.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Even though she's divorcing and I've never been married, it seems to me, and I've had a lot to learn, and I'm older, okay, but it seems to me I'm teaching her about intimacy, and I'm not pretending that I'm sort of relationship expert, but I say, listen to her, we must be intimate, and that means that on whatever degree that you can do it, you got to tell me your inner feelings and thoughts that should be private. Okay, not ones that you share with others, outside the romantic relationship, and I'm basically the guy that's basically a low maintenance guy, and so she's like got these issues. I'm like, okay, well, this comes from having intimacy. These issues will dissipate and resolve themselves, so, but I guess, she's been wounded and she is fearful, but, and she's the one who wants to jump in the relationship more. She's has more trepidation. But I find, go on.
Let me say something directly about you and her, since you're asking.
Yeah.
Is that there's a issue being elevated in your relationship that she may not be aware of.
Yeah.
And it's about attachment.
Yeah.
When you say that she's kind of more needy than you are, as long as it's clear that, while you're together, you're monogamous.
Yep.
It doesn't mean we're going to get married. I'm not guaranteeing the future, but
right.
While we're together, I will honor and respect our relationship, and I will not, double time you and all that.
Right.
So if she's willing to accept that and she finds herself longing for more, now we're in kind of a spiritual discussion realm about, well, what's the need for attachment? And she may or may not choose. I mean, it's not uncommon for women to want to have security. And so the fantasy is, well, if I'm married, I have the security, primary commitment. But as we know, that doesn't really mean anything. Anyway, right? You get divorced, people die on you or whatever.
Right.
But her issue around the attachment is like, can you really be there 100%, love somebody, feel that love, without the need to possess them? That's a hard place to get to. And oftentimes, if you get to that place, then the need for an individual relationship may just kind of melt away because you're in this state of just being love and everybody's there, so who do you take home? Because you're feeling this love for everybody. So that may be one of the issues that you could explore is kind of what's her sense of feeling, what's part of the neediness, and don't see it as a pathological thing. Look at it as an aspect of the ego wanting to possess control. And it's about how do you get to where you can live in the moment without trying to possess something. It takes a lot of trust to just be there. Now, whether the relationship continues or not, who knows? But she may learn something profound about what happens when you can let go and just be present, living. Your consciousness starts to expand and change. That may be what's also going on in your relationship.
Great stuff. Let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Dr. Ronald Mann.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. Ever heard of accelerated learning techniques? What if you learned more deeply than ever before? What if you remembered what you learned far better than ever before? Visit www.perficio.io. That's perficio.io, where you can understand perhaps better than ever before.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and Dr. Ronald Mann. We're having a wonderful conversation about the love factor inventory, LFI, and relationships and intimacy. And, it reminds me of something. And in the 90s, I think a psychologist wrote a book, and he or she claimed that just listening to a couple talk for a few minutes, he could say if they would, he could predict if they would stay together, if there would be relationship success or not. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard of this person or book?
No, I don't.
It's interesting. Now, and again, I'm not a relationship expert. I love psychology. That's my favorite subject. I'm always studying psychology. And as a coach, I'm a practical psychologist, even though I never even took a psychology course in college. I want to put that out there. I love psychology, but it seems to me that, and I don't think I've read that book, when a person, you can listen to a couple talking, if they have any sort of animosity towards each other, that's a big tell.
It is.
That's a big tell. People, I think, will gloss over that they should not. And I've noticed that I had a relationship a couple of years ago, and it was long. I loved her, but we had a good chemistry. But she had animosity towards me that stemmed from things she wouldn't forgive me over, and I realized that this doesn't bode well for the relationship. And of course, it ended. But in the LFI, what sort of things does it measure? Is it looking for some sort of prediction of compatibility or assessment of compatibility, or just of like a personality healthiness?
It's the latter. It doesn't predict compatibility. It's not a matchmaking kind of thing of, because those things oftentimes they look at kind of superficial traits. Mm-hmm. I like to golf. She likes to golf. Hey, we got a relationship going here. But, this, because of my background as a psychologist and all my spiritual stuff, it's about one's individual depth of realization and capacity to function as a solid, healthy, functioning human being and bring that in the relationship with another person. So it's, from my point of view, it's kind of better than a matchmaking thing, because those tend to be kind of surfacey. I'm trying to get Match.com at some point to use this thing, because that would be the next step. You meet somebody, you like them, they're attractive, you got some similar interests. Now the question is, are they even functioning at a level that you should invest your time with this person? Do they have the capacity to be a good potential mate? And do you? So if each person took that, realized where they're functioning and what they would need to change, because people can grow. Just because you score low somewhere doesn't mean that you're out to lunch and you're never going to have a relationship. It just means, well, here, get to work. Let's develop those areas. So it's a profound way to have a personal growth, transformational experience with another person. Whether or not you choose to be in a relationship, there may be other factors involved, but you're looking at, is this the kind of person that you'd want to be with? Do they have the capacity to be a good friend? Do they have capacity to show compassion, be compassionate? Are they psychologically healthy? Or are they caught up with a lot of their own internal fears and anxieties? Spiritually, do they have any degree of spiritual realization? I mean, these are important qualities that I think determine whether or not we can function well as human beings. And then there's other things that get involved too, whether or not you'd want to pair up as a mate. Attraction is big. People like to be attracted to each other in relationship. Otherwise, you kind of fall into friends. So there's other things that could go on, but at the level of how functioning are you? And is this other person capable of being? Because I've been with people who, they're attractive and we had similar interests in this and that, but they had some issues that really made it impossible to have a relationship with them. I mean, they could not develop and sustain a relationship. They would do something to screw it up.
I think personal development is actually an integral part of being in a relationship. I mean, I'm into personal development for whatever reasons and in any ways, but I think if I'm going to be in a romantic sexual relationship, that I have to embrace personal development to some degree in order for the relationship to succeed.
I think that's critical. I think, one of the realities is that we're here on Earth to grow and develop. We're not just here to take up space. We have an opportunity to learn about our spiritual nature and to become better human beings. And so oftentimes we'll come into a relationship, and that relationship will bring to the surface important issues that we each need to look at to help us in that development. So it becomes a mirror in a way. You see yourself reflected in the relationship. And so it's a great asset, because on your own, you might not have even seen any of this stuff.
Early, before we started the interview, we were talking about addiction and recovery and how the LFI can actually work in that as well. And we didn't initially agree to talk about this. We talked about love, and relationships, but I want to, and I know Ron wants to too. So let's start. and I'll tell you. And the reason why I want to start it now is, when I'm a recovered addict, alcoholic. The biggest hurdle that I had to get through or over was loving myself. And that was, because if I didn't love myself, it wasn't worth doing. It wasn't worth. That's why it took me 600 attempts before I finally got clean and sober. And I had to get through this area, this time where I had to fight myself that I would love myself. And because I was against it. My ego was, I should say, not the spiritual side, which is of course forgiving, what forgave my parents, forgiving myself, forgiving everyone, right? And that's a process, but that made that hurdle possible to get over, to forgive, to love myself, and that I was deserving of my own love. And giving it, and to give it freely. Now that's not obviously not just important in addiction recovery, but in a romantic sexual relationship, you've got to in order to give love, you've got to love yourself first. And we talked about this at the outset, but in terms of the LFI, how is it relevant? This part or regarding recovery?
Well, I think it's a great tool for people who are in recovery, for counselors, therapists who work in that community, who are helping people recover, for recovery homes, where people go and spend $30,000 to be there for a month. They're very expensive. That the inventory, taking your inventory is one of the steps. And so what does that mean? It's like having honest introspection about who we are. And so any tools that can help us honestly and clearly realize what's going on inside of us can be valuable in that phase. And so, we keep coming back to self-love. If we're treated with love when we're growing up and we're around loving people, we tend to internalize that. It's really through osmosis. It comes into our subconscious, goes into our cells, becomes part of our identity. Because typically we take on qualities of our parents. And so, if you hate your dad because he does something and you find out, my God, I'm acting just the same, you're not gonna like that, right? And so to clear up, what are your perceptions of other people, and resolve those, forgive them, and get all that stuff out of you. I worked with a woman just the other day who her great grandmother was very difficult, and she internalized a lot of that. So now, many years later, we're doing some psycho-spiritual healing to energetically clean her out, get the stuff out of her subconscious, out of her cells, out of her whole being. So what's in there now is a loving, clear presence that can honor the self, not this feeling of contamination and darkness that she picked up from someone in her family years ago. So all of these qualities of just the psychological adjustment scale gives you a little window into how comfortable are you with what's inside of you and your inner life. Do you have fear? Have anxiety? I mean, if you do, there's reasons for that. And to be able to explore those things, resolve them. And so I'm a big fan of a combined psychological, spiritual form of healing. Meditation, prayer, grace are powerful tools, not just at a physical level, but also as the emotional level. I mean, many of us have had the experience of going to a healer, and energetically, they just transmit something. And we absorb it, and it works on your subtle energy body, and then it kind of comes down into your physical body or your emotional body and changes you. I used to do that all the time. People would come, I say, well, did you come for psychotherapy or did you come for the one-shot miracle cure? They go, oh, I'm here for the miracle cure. So we would go into meditation. I use a little self-hypnosis, get people deeper inside, and then energetically start to clean things out. And when the energy is really flowing and working, it changes things very quickly. So it's a tool that I think in that community could be very profound. And I would encourage anybody in recovery, if you're working on yourself, take the test and get a clear picture of what you need to work on.
Now, I am a lover of both psychology and spirituality, as you obviously are too. How do you define spirituality?
Spirituality is the realization that we are more than our physical body. We're more than our ego, our mind, that we're basically made in the image and likeness of God. Our basic nature is love, joy, peace, bliss, deeper levels. And that you can believe whatever you want to believe. It's not tied to a particular religion. You can have an experience with Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or whomever, Moses. It doesn't matter how you feel that presence. What matters is that you feel this connection and this love in all creation and beyond, and that you have the capacity to forgive. You have a desire to serve people. You have a desire to make the world a better place. And you're committed to the honest realization and transformation of yourself to be in that divine place as much as you can possibly be.
Beautiful. Let's take a quick moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Dr. Ronald Mann.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. When Ben Franklin arrived in Philadelphia, all he had was 10 cents in his pocket. Despite this, he became America's first self-made man. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io to actually have the knowledge and principles of Ben Franklin transferred into yourself.
You're all listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and Dr. Ronald Mann. We're talking about LFI. We're talking about spirituality, and that's love factor inventory, by the way. We're talking about a number of things. Dr. Mann just gave us his description of spirituality. I totally concur. And, I'm going to add to that. I'll add my piece. Right now I'm studying Stoicism, which is really fascinating to me, written by Marcus. Well, I'm specifically Marcus Aurelius's book, The Meditations, written 1800 years ago. And I have a protege that we're going through this stuff. It's really great stuff. And he talks about the soul a lot. And what I've done, at least in the study of this book, is that when he talks about the soul, I say this is my top 5 values. So my top 5 values, the most important things to me, come from my soul. What do you think about that? Does that can you jive with that, or is that?
I do. The soul is our authentic self. Psychology looks at it from a kind of personality thing, saying the truth and knowing what you feel. But that's at the level of our kind of psychology. Our spiritual nature is the soul. The soul, comes into the physical body and manifests, and the soul is beyond the ego. The ego is limited. And when we realize the soul, that was a profound realization for me when I really got in touch with that, because now I'm feeling uplifted, I'm feeling loving, I'm feeling light internally, I'm feeling compassion, blissful. All of a sudden I'm tapped into wisdom that I had read about, but I never understood what these guys were talking about. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm having direct experience of all this stuff. And so the soul is our nature. I've been a devotee of Parmansi Yogananda for about 40 years and studying self-realization fellowships and doing Kriya Yoga. And Is that
a Hinduism or an element of Hinduism?
Well, it's a combination of different things, but it takes basic Hindu practices that come out of the Bhagavad Gita about divine realization, yoga, meditation, Patanjali's path of moving higher up and internalizing your life force energy and bringing it up to the spiritual eye and transforming your inner level of realization. And so it's about the soul. And I used to do a fair amount of work with people who are terminally ill and have had some near-death experiences. And my experience is that when you die, things don't stop. You slide out of the body. There's not a moment of loss of consciousness. It's like your hand slipping out of a glove. And your consciousness is very real. And now you're in a different kind of body. It's an energy light body, but you're still there and you're in another realm. And so the soul is eternal and kind of leads us into reincarnation in terms of we have multiple lifetimes and we keep working on ourselves, and everything we do in a particular lifetime can help us in the next or not, depending upon what we're doing with our life. And as a psychologist and a spiritual guy, I discovered that the thought that you leave on when you die, leave the body, is the thought that you come in on. So our issues have continuity. So whatever you do in this life to clean yourself up, you will benefit. If you're coming back, you're going to benefit from whatever you've done, even to the last moment of your breath.
I'll tell you my story of reincarnation. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, but I studied Greek mythology as pre-adolescent, and it just fascinated me. And on my own, not part of the school curriculum, on my own, I got into it. And then later on, I visited Rome, and I was blown away by Rome. And preceding that, I had went down to Mexico, central Mexico, and I to scuba dive in the cenotes, the underwater caverns. And I visited Tulum, which is the one Mayan ruin that's on the water. All the rest are inland. And when I went to visit, I fainted, but didn't lose consciousness. And as I laid on the ground, I was all heated and I just had no strength to stand up. As I laid on the ground, I saw Tulum as it was, exactly as it was 1,500 years ago. And I couldn't even move. I just saw it. And it's like, wow, it was freaking weird as I was finally able to stand up. And then I was quadding to near the jungle, and it occurred to me that there was something in there I had to find. I have no idea what it was. And then later on, subsequent to all this, it occurred to me that, and I had never had this idea up until this point, that 2,500 years ago, I was a Greek. 2,000 years ago, I was a Roman. 1,500 years ago, I was a Mayan. And there's something in the jungle down Central Mexico. I got to go and find it. I have no idea what it was. And I'm still a Christian. Okay. Now other Christians are like, no, you can't you can't believe in that reincarnation to be a Christian. Well, guess what? You're looking at the one who does, because that works for me. I believe in this. I believe, and I also, but that's my story of in terms of my own experience. But why I believe in reincarnation is this. And I found that the life is a tragic affair. It really is, but it has joy too. Don't get me wrong. Lots of joy too, but life is tragic. We talked about earlier, before our interview, Ron, your brother died 30 years ago from heroin. My sister died 20 years ago, killed by a drunk driver. She was like me. And that was the event that caused me to finally get into sobriety. It's tragic for them and tragic for us who were left behind, and those who love them. It's really tragic for us more than them, because their suffering is over. We continue, right? Well, at least we mourn the loss. But I saw how a tragic life was, especially for young people who die young. That's the part that gets me the most. Young people or suffering, or some people suffer more than others. How I believe that the universe is self-organizing and it balances itself. How does this jive with that? It doesn't, except through reincarnation.
Right.
Except the reincarnation. That's where it makes sense. The universe can self-organize, can balance itself if there's reincarnation. Otherwise, I don't, there's too much tragedy. How do you reconcile all this tragedy? I reconcile it with reincarnation. That's why I believe in reincarnation.
And that's my experience, is that, if the purpose of existence, God created us, we can always talk about why God would even do such a thing, but God created us, and the purpose is to evolve to where we come back into the full realization of our divine nature, that every lifetime is an opportunity to continue to grow in that way. And so one of the beliefs is that before you're reincarnated, you got to choose, what do you need in this lifetime, what set of circumstances, relationships, whatever, in order to learn the lessons. And so these kids who come in, oftentimes, with cancer, leukemia, whatever, they're here for a short time. My experience is they were pretty profound beings. And so the lifetime was short in order to just do what they needed to do. My last lifetime, I was a child in Nazi Germany. I was tortured and gassed, and came back pretty quickly with the desire to try and help make this world a better place. Because my thought was, well, we're not animals. Actually, we kind of are, but we're not animals. Potentially, we can be better. And so those lifetimes of suffering, if we had the gift to see all these incarnations, we'd see that the pattern and the threads, and go, oh, that makes perfectly good sense. And I agree with you. I think life is very difficult. There's potentially a tremendous amount of suffering, and that's why personally I like the spiritual path so much, because there's a model here that says, okay, you're caught in this delusional world of suffering, but there's a way out. If you start doing these spiritual practices, then you can get beyond it, and you can help move through the suffering more quickly. You don't have to be in so much physical pain, and you can free up the bad karma that you brought in with you and improve the quality of your life. I was brought up Jewish, but when I was working with these kids who were terminally ill, I got involved with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I was in. She's a woman who wrote all the stages of death, the 5 stages of death.
Yes, I knew I
Bunch
recognized.
of, she was a mystic, actually. I went to Hawaii, spent a week with her, and had all these mystical experiences. And it started with being in Jerusalem with Jesus, back when Jesus was walking around. Now, I wasn't anybody in particular, but I was in this visionary state. I was there close enough. I felt his consciousness, and bam, it changed me instantly. It was my first experience of real love. And I felt that for everybody. And so it was that led me to other things. And then I got involved with yoga and meditation, Parmansi, Yogananda. So I'm kind of like you, I've got this spiritual life that has direct experience with enlightened beings. And Jesus certainly is one of those. But there's also other beings around who are Christ-like in the way that they live, and they're full of wisdom, and they came here or are here to help uplift humanity as well. And there's value in their teachings and being in their presence.
Absolutely. And another, I'm not that this podcast is not about my beliefs so much, where it's where it's about, I want to help people by bringing in people, experts like yourself, and people who are distinguished and that are credible to talk about what you do. But it is a conversation. And another reason why, well, in terms of reincarnation, obviously life is difficult and complex. And so in being spiritual or just trying to intellectualize life or figure life or the meaning of life, that old question, that old coin question, it seems to me that there's some agreement with God before I'm born, before anyone is born, and that's their mission or their destiny, something like that. I don't pretend to know. I'm just another human, along for the ride. All right. But there's some agreement with God. And that's the stuff. And there's an evolution along the way to keep this agreement with God. I don't know what it is. I only have faith, and faith is not knowledge. Faith is a belief, but I in terms of, so that's how I explain about why people, that's my understand, how I reconcile when people do what they do, especially when it may be disturbing, that they're trying to figure out on their own. They're on their own journey, like I'm on my own journey. But at the same time, it's life's a bitch, but it's okay. It's okay. I really, I used to really, like I already talked about, I really had a serious problem with life. I said recently in another interview, like before, if you would have showed me where the doomsday button was, I would have pressed it quickly. And now I'll guard it. I'm like, no, I'm in the way, so, there's surprises coming. There's transitions coming. There's transcending is coming. It's to my own physical life. Why wouldn't I believe that there's greater transitions in the post life? I do. And I believe there was ones in the pre-life, because this makes sense. We're energy, right? We can literally be measured as energy. Right. So it makes sense. So I believe in the energy. The energy is a scientific fact. So that's not just a belief, but a fact. And I think that vibration, right? Energy it can be measured vibrationally. So, and that we operate, as you talked about earlier, about a vibration. If you operate at a higher vibration, that will resonate with other high vibrations. There'll be attraction. There can be a fit. So you want to be deliberate, not necessarily thinking in the term of vibration, but improving yourself. Maybe I shouldn't lie so much. Okay, maybe I can tell the truth a little bit more. Maybe I can tell about what I'm afraid of. be vulnerable, without being stupid, be discerning in who you choose to be intimate with, but be deliberate in improving yourself. And then these other esoteric stuff, they'll take care of themselves. What do you think about that, Doc?
Well, I think you've opened the door for a very profound discussion.
Oh,
so
God.
we go
apologize.
back. No, you're a wise man and you've got a depth to you, and I appreciate everything that you're saying here.
Thank you.
If we go back to when God created the universe, all right, he created it and he had to create duality. Because if you don't have light, there is no darkness. And so one of the things that makes life on Earth potentially so horrendous is that it's built in that we have this conflict between the light and the dark. All the Star Wars movies, I think, so popular because it speaks to this collective unconscious that we know what's going on, right? And so God gave us free choice. So it's up to us to choose, are we going to the light or going to the dark? And the purpose in God's experiment was say, okay, I'm going to give all these beings free choice. Let's see what they do with it. The way out is to make God the greatest desire, because it's our attachments to things and unfulfilled desires that draw us back into an incarnation. We have to come back and work it out and do some more. So if the mission is to get to the state of God first, then we can let go of peripheral attachments and clean up the past karma. And just a note about Parmansi Yogananda and Kriya Yoga, the thing that really got me when I was reading about it is that one breath, it's a pranayama technique, it's working with the life force energy in the spine. He's saying, if you lead a reasonably healthy life and you're a decent person, it takes 1 million lifetimes to work out all this karma. Kriya Yoga, one breath is equal to 1 year. So you start doing Kriya Yoga. When I first started doing Kriya Yoga, and I'd been meditating 6 years doing other things, the first 2 weeks, every time I did it, I could feel my breath change. I felt my consciousness change, and I saw down to earth changes in my life. This is every day for the first 2 weeks. Kind of toned down after that, but it was profound. I thought, this is amazing. It's not that hard of a technique, but because it's based on some ancient wisdom, presumably the same kind of techniques that Jesus used with the disciples, that it transforms consciousness. And so, we're in this state of duality, and then it gets even worse. I mean, if I could have a little conversation with God, we'd have a talk about this one, is that there's things called yugas. They're 12,000-year cycles of the Earth going around the sun. We've heard about the Dark Ages and the Enlightened Ages. Well, every 12,000 years, these cycles go up. And so in the Dark Ages, and we're kind of coming out of that, things are even worse than they are now. What we're in called Dwarpa Yuga, which is a little higher, and it finally goes up to the highest level. And then it repeats itself, goes all the way down. So in the course of creation, the goal is not to have to keep reincarnating if we can get free. Sometimes God said, well, wouldn't you go back to help other people? And typically, if God asks you to do something, you say yes. So you might come back, but you're a free soul. You're here to really help other people. And so all of the struggles are embedded in creation. So it takes a strong will, a lot of faith to put up with the nonsense that we have to live with here. I mean, I find it difficult to watch the news. It's so negative. It's so disturbing. I like to know what's going on in the world, so I'll watch a little bit and I go,
I limit it.
Yeah, I just can't watch too much of it. It's just too painful to see the same stuff going on. Back when I was doing the work in the Soviet Union, I made one of my audio programs. It was gave away for free, a piece for world, a meditation for world peace. That thing is as relevant today as it was 35 years ago. I mean, probably be good for another few hundred years. So the struggle is, like you say, life can be a real bitch. And how do you survive it? If we don't have the inner direction, the resource, it's like an island of serenity to go to where there is peace and there is some connection to something bigger, better, and more uplifting. Life can be very, very difficult, and it's no wonder people get really depressed. And if we have a weak will and we allow ourselves to be taken over by these negative dark forces, we can be used. I mean, I don't know if you see the kid who parents bought him a gun and went and shot and killed 4 kids in school.
I don't look at it. I don't even look at it. So
if you look at,
I heard
and
they're all
arrested. They're all arrested, so they got pictures. You look into their eyes, and they say the eyes are the window of the soul. They are the darkest, kind of demonic looking things. This kid, and the kid even wrote a note going, "These thoughts, I can't stop the thoughts. Help me." Well, I used to work with people who were possessed when I was a psychologist, and people who were inundated by that stuff. There are dark forces that can take us over. So we need a strong will. We need a positive connection to the light. Like you say, you don't look at it because you don't want to vibrate and resonate and let all that darkness in. You try and hang out with uplifting people who are like-minded, spiritually around higher vibration, because it enhances our life. And because we live in a world that's potentially got lots of trouble.
Now, to my audience, you may have noticed that this podcast is going much longer than usual. And it's simply because I'm having such a wonderful, awesome conversation with Dr. Ronald Mann that I'm doing it deliberately. I'm aware that, most of my interviews are about 45 minutes. We're well over an hour. And we're gonna do one more final segment, because even though I want to continue much longer, but I'm going to cut it short, and we're going to definitely have Dr. Ronald Mann back on a subsequent interview. And we're going to talk about things like cults. We're going to talk about Zen, which we haven't even mentioned yet, but I know that he's got a lot to say about it, just from our conversations, because it's obvious, I want to talk about the book Conversations with God. You use that term, and that book was very impactful to me. Obviously, we have psychology and spirituality in common, and we've already talked about it at length, but there's so much more to talk about regarding these subjects. So we're going to take our final moment to hear from our sponsor real briefly, and then we're going to come back with the final segment for this interview. And mark my words, audience, there will be a second one. A quick moment to hear from our sponsor.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. What if you could get the results of being coached without a human coach? What if a computer could coach you? Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can get coached without scrutiny, judgment, or pressure.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and we're with Dr. Ronald Mann. And you've been listening. You can probably see that I'm enjoying this conversation so much. That's why it's extended. I'm really resonating. I feel a great rapport with you. I'm really resonating with this conversation. And I think that is actually very valuable, at least very interesting. But I think it's also very valuable to a listener, because we talk about things where a person can really improve their lives one way or another. And so I'm going to ask you now about what you also can do specifically for a person is let's talk about love. We're talking about the love factor inventory, but how do you measure love?
Well, we talked about this in some detail. I've got this instrument called the love factor inventory. It's an assessment. It's really a process, because if you're really going to use it, you're going to get information that you can then use in a process, hopefully with another trained person, to help you dive deeper for introspection and transformation.
So the inventory measures love. That's what it does.
It looks at your capacity to develop and sustain intimate relationships. And there are scales: compassion, friendship, psychological adjustment, spirituality, trust.
So what's implicit
self-respect.
is in the inventory, if they see what they're weak or they have less, they have something that they don't have in great abundance, that's an area where the person should work on. Is that the presumption?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's in my working definition of love here, it's more than a feeling. Because someone can say, "Oh, I love you,"
Yeah,
and then they abandon you 2 days later, right? So in that moment, they
I've
may
had
have
that.
felt something. That we all have had that. In that moment, they may have actually felt something, and that could have been like from the soul, this connection with another person. But love needs to be more than just a transitory passing feeling. It's like, are you there to care for, sustain, engage, and be with somebody over the long haul? And so this test looks at those qualities. Do you have the skills to get yourself out of the way and to really be there for another human being? Like you were saying earlier, are you capable of being honest? Are you capable of being vulnerable? I've got a masculine, feminine scale that kind of looks at that dimension. The feminine is more connected to feelings and intuition. The masculine side, more intellectual, more controlling, more rational. And so in order to be engaged, you need a little vulnerability. That's what brings people closer. You don't fall in love through your mind, typically, although the mind can be a great attraction force if someone has a good intellect, and you do too, and you're drawn by that. But the heart is important too. So that's what the test is. It's a process to be engaged in, and it starts with the assessment.
How does now we talked about spirituality throughout this conversation. How does one's spirituality impact a person's ability to develop and sustain intimate, loving relationships?
My experience is that I became a more loving human being when I woke up spiritually, because the nature of spirit, which is manifested in our individual soul, the nature of spirit is love, unconditional love, has forgiveness, has joy, has compassion. I felt a strong desire to serve humanity and care for other people more than I did as just a normal everyday psychologist. And I had some desire, otherwise I wouldn't have been chosen to go in that profession. But our spiritual realization, from my point of view, is that it helps us to become actually a better human being. Because if we can bring those qualities into everyday life, then we function better. We function in a more caring kind of way. Your HC something, those three things.
HRC. I remember Hillary Rodham Clinton. That's why I remember.
Oh, right, yeah. So in the HRC, the more spiritual we are, and it's integrated, and we've done the psychological work to get ourselves out of the way, the better human beings we can be.
Totally. So where can people take the Love Factor inventory?
The place to go is the website called lovefactorinventory.com. And don't make the mistake and go to the Love Factory. People do. It's not a factory. It's like a factor, more a little scientific. Lovefactorinventory.com. You can take it.
Ron, it's not a porno site, is it?
No, it is not. But as a side note, I got invited to do a podcast with somebody about love. And it turns out that the woman was in sadomasochistic relationships, and we never talked about love. I'm more of a psychologist. I couldn't believe I was on that thing. So thank you for not being that. So it's not a porno site. It's the Love Factor Inventory. You can take it there. There's also a free assessment. I call it the mini version. It's the free interpretive guide. The actual assessment has 124 items. It takes about 15 minutes to take. This free assessment has 20 items. There's a couple items from every scale. So you can get a general idea of where you are, and basically you get a percentile score. And I say if you get over 80 percentile, you're probably doing pretty good. If it's under 80, certainly you could benefit from taking the full test and then exploring what areas are. So if you go to that website, on the front page, there's a pop-up that says free interpretive guide. There's also other links. If you look for free interpretive guide, you can take that. And as a benefit to the listeners, if you take that free thing, I'll know you took it, and we'll get in touch. And if you want, I'll give you 20 minutes of free discussion. It's worth some money because I normally charge $250 an hour to do stuff.
Thank you very much, Doc.
So 20-minute free conversation to give you some clue about what's going on. And then if you want to do some more work, I do also have people that I've certified, professional coaches who I've trained to use this. So if you're looking for somebody you want to talk to, you've got choices. You go to the listing there, you can see who's there and choose somebody if you want to work with somebody.
Fantastic. So just so you're clear, people, he's offering you not just to take this free gift, but actually also a consultation. So I really encourage you to go to lovefactorinventory.com and take Dr. Ronald Mann up on his offer of this free gift. What have you got to lose? He also, and you also have some other websites, ronmann.com. What's that about? That's about you, but can you?
Well, that was my initial, this site's been around for 30, 40 years.
Wow.
I've done a lot of work in consciousness. I used to be a psychologist. I developed, I've written a bunch of books. I made these audio programs. All that stuff is listed there. I've written a bunch of articles. So there's articles, there's guided meditations, there's books. I mean, there's a whole ton of stuff at ronmann.com. That's kind of my consciousness personal development website.
Great.
The Love Factor Inventory is specifically designed to be able to administer and take this. I also did a lot of work as a sports psychologist working with golfers.
Yeah.
So I made another site, Ron Mann Golf, that's got actually an 8.5 hour online certification program. If you're in the golf world and you want to learn how to coach the mental game, I can certify you and give you 8.5 hours of video training of how to do that. So it combines what I know.
And then they can be a golf coach then?
Right.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's really ideal for coaches who are into mechanics, which most coaches are. Golf is a very mental game. If you want to expand your capacity to help your students, take this training. So not only are you doing mechanical stuff, but you're also helping them work with their inner life.
You also have one other website, masterthankus.com.
Yeah, it's Tonka's actually.
Tonka's.
Yeah, it's my artistic site. It's Tonkas are a Tibetan Buddhist tapestry, and typically they have hand painted images of some Buddhist kind of thing. And I was looking at that, and I learned how to sew. I started making masks when COVID came, giving them away. So I got a great sewing machine. I go, what else can I do with this? I made enough masks. And I thought, I'm looking at the Tonkas I have, so they kind of look like quilts. So I thought I could make these and put pictures of masters, yoga masters in there. So I started making them, and they're very devotional and they're very profound. And it's MASTER, Master Tonkas, spelled weird, THANGKAS.com. And you'll see it's got Yogananda, Sri Keshwar, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Jesus, Ramana Maharshi, just to name a few. And so they're very pretty, and actually it's a devotional piece of artwork that if you put it in your house, you'll feel the difference.
Wow, what a great eclectic bunch of stuff you offer. That's fantastic. Let me tell you, Dr. Ronald Mann, you have been an extraordinary guest. That's why I've extended this conversation for so long, and we're going to have you back a second time, mark my words, because I really am impressed by you, and your energy is wonderful, and that's why it's went this long. Do you have any final remarks for our audience?
Well, I think they should be very grateful for you doing what you do. You are a wonderful guy. You can feel a depth of honesty and love that just kind of permeates from you. And so to do what you do, to find people and have these kinds of conversations is a gift to people. So I hope that your audience appreciates how much you're giving them, because this is a free podcast that they can listen to, and there's a lot of wisdom that you're able to share through it.
Thank you very much, Doc. I really appreciate that very much. And do you have now, of course, you've given out the websites, but do you have an email address or something if somebody wanted to contact you directly that you'd like to?
Sure. Yeah. My email address that I'm using mostly because of the love factor thing is Dr. Mann, DRMANN, at lovefactorinventory.com. And I do a lot of Zoom calls. So, email me and we'll find a way to connect, if we want to talk, phone, Zoom, whatever.
Ron, you have been a fantastic guest. All my conversations are great, but this really was extraordinary. And I really appreciate you joining me and sharing with the audience. I really loved it. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Thank you for the audience for listening or watching. And remember, everyone, we are all responsible for ourselves, and we can all use a little help. With that, thank you very much. We'll see you next time. You want to say goodbye, Dr. Mann?
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for being here.
Great.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. Remember to visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Self-Help Coaching Podcast.